Okay, I'm not sure how well my voice is going to hold up for the whole entire thing because been kind of this up down thing going on with the weather where we keep going from really warm temperatures to really cold temperatures and then back to warm temperatures again. It's kind of caused my sinuses to mess up, which has caused me a little squeaking here and there in my voice, but I think I'll be okay for this one. One thing I had talked about in the past on here was how many AA defenders, I guess you could say, or pro AA people, will oftentimes attack people who question the dogma of their program is not having a counter. I didn't like the way that was going to sound in a phrasing, so I'll put it like this. The attitude is because their religious cult is ingrained in the culture, and religious cult is ingrained in the treatment center field. That if you have a problem with the kind of dogmatic preaching that they put forth and the silly notions that you're somehow some defective sinner because you had some kind of a drinking problem or a drug problem, they'll ask you what your solution is, which I had pointed out before that when it comes to certain superstitious mumbo jumbo, I don't need to offer an alternative for that. Like, I don't need to offer an alternative to people who wanted to hang witches in Salem. I don't have to, if they say, well, what's your answer here? Well, there's no witches in Salem. That's my answer. Similarly, one thing I was thinking about here, and I'm going to use the Orange Papers as a source to guide me through some of the ideas I had when coming up with this one, is that AA often does this thing, and it's something that it also dominates the treatment center industry in general, where they're presupposing and they're viewing everybody who has a problem with drinking or a problem with substance abuse or whatever. They're presupposing from the get-go that this person must be this extremely selfish kind of individual that cares nothing about other people, that's only there to take and take and take, that lives like a parasite, that is constantly to blame for every bad thing that's ever happened to them in their entire life, that is always in the wrong for everything, and that people with addiction problems basically are disgusting, twisted individuals that are in need of some moral doctrine that's pounded into their brains in order to make them understand that the only way to quit drinking is to be this subservient piece of shit for the rest of your life, apologizing for the very fact that you were born and exist because you had a drinking problem. When you look at people with addiction through that lens, if you're presupposing from the get-go that everybody who's ever had a drinking problem or an addiction problem is this horrible parasite that's in need of some kind of religious conversion in order to quit drinking, then I don't think there's any way to have an honest and rational discussion about addiction in the addiction field, because everybody's viewing addiction through that clouded lens, this bizarre religious dogmatic approach. But one thing I was going to fall back on here in my previous point about alternative solutions, AA doesn't offer any solutions for anything outside of telling you to feel a lot of self-contempt and a lot of self-loathing and to constantly pray, and to constantly lick the boots of old-timers in meetings and constantly read that same old book, which has no scientific basis or merit whatsoever, that just makes a bunch of baseless assertions about the minds of individuals who have a drinking problem, and again, it's not grounded in any kind of reality whatsoever. But there is one thing that Orange Papers had pointed out, that steps 6 and 7, where you're asking God to remove your shortcomings and humbly begging God to take away your character defects, which it's like he does say here, and I'm not going to quote that point, but he says at one point it looks like Bill just needed to add some extra steps into the silly little program, and he just put those in there. Miracles on demand. God, make me perfect. If I say God, make me left-handed as opposed to right-handed, I kind of don't think that there's any kind of supernatural entity that's going to actually make that happen because of the way my brain is wired. So to say that God is going to remove these character defects that you define as character defects, by the way, which might just be simple human nature. You're criminalizing human nature and turning everything that's in human nature into some kind of fucking sin and saying God has to remove it or you'll never stop drinking. You're looking at human nature as being inherently evil based on this religious lens that you're draping over human nature and not seeing human nature as just being what it is. It's complex, it's multifaceted, and even in the scientific and philosophical fields, if you've ever read any books by Daniel Dennett, which I'm not exactly 100% in agreement with him on, but where he talks about consciousness being illusion, but consciousness still being a biological product of a thinking mind and a central nervous system, not something immaterial or whatever. But there's more complexity to human nature than just saying everything that human nature has in it, honesty, dishonesty, or whatever else you want to label as a character defect. It's just saying, well, that's a sin because you're not living according to God's will, and unless you obey God's will, you'll drink yourself to death. It's just a piss-poor framework to even try to attempt to understand what motivates people with drinking problems. But I'm going to start here with what Orange Papers is talking about from the 12 and 12. And he says, the Alcoholics Anonymous literature teaches self-contempt and self-loathing. One of the saddest examples of this is his Bill W.'s second book, The 12 Steps and the 12 Traditions. By the time Bill wrote that in 1952, he was deep into his madness, in the middle of an 11-year bout of deep, crippling clinical depression, and just raved about his hatred of alcoholics nonstop for 192 pages. He had nothing but self-contempt and self-loathing to offer newcomers. I want to stop before I read this thing and say, Dr. Silkworth, who was never really that honored in his field or whatever, suggested a disease of alcoholism, and the so-called disease of alcoholism comes from a 19th century idea that was published in a paper. Kenneth Anderson published an article about it where it said back in the 19th century they thought morphine addiction could possibly be a disease, as in being transmitted. Like you could take the blood of a morphine addict and inject the blood of a morphine addict into somebody else, and maybe that person would become a morphine addict. Well, of course, after a whole entire few decades there were wasted scientific research in the 19th century, they concluded, you know what? You can't become a morphine addict by having a morphine addict's blood injected into you. That's where that whole disease concept come from. But that Bill W. never did believe in the fact that it was a disease. He went straight for this fucking sin angle thing and this pseudo-religious horseshit. Nowhere did he ever, does he really talk in his book about biological processes that could cause people to be abnormal. He just says, we're bodily and mentally different from our fellows, which is complete utter bullshit. If you drink a lot of alcohol over a period of time, yeah, it has effects on your brain. It has effects on, I forgot the part of the brain that's the rewarding part of your brain. I can't remember what it's called now. I could Google, but if I got into that, it would be off topic of what I'm talking about here. But he never talked about any of that. He talked about sin, self-will, selfishness, and all this other drivel that has absolutely nothing to do with a physical disease. He never believed it was a disease. He never believed that alcoholics were sick people that were just trying to get better. He believed in promoting every ugly stereotype that's ever been said about people with drinking problems. And because of him and his stupid fucking program, the majority of culture tends to believe that about people with bad drinking problems, the way it's portrayed in movies, the way it's portrayed everywhere. The guy with the drinking is a real drag on everybody, or he's abusive, or he's a lowlife, or whatever it is. All caused by this particular meta-narrative started by this silly fucking program. But anyway, I'll continue reading. He had jewels of self-contempt and self-loathing like this to offer to newcomers. And this is Bill W.'s writing out of the 12 and 12. Let's ponder the need for a list of the more glaring personality defects all of us have in varying degrees. Personality defects in varying degrees. You're talking about human nature. You're talking about really basic human nature. I mean, to those who have religious training, such a list would set forth serious violations of moral principles. What? To those who have religious training, such a list would set forth serious violations of moral principles. So you're saying that you know more than those with religious training, or are you trying to say that religious training is right? Because if you're going to say religious training is right, which religious training are we going to talk about here? Because there's multitudes and multitudes and multitudes of different types of religious beliefs. And somehow or the other, you're claiming that out of all those thousands and thousands of multitudes of different religious beliefs, your idea of what religious belief is the correct one. You call atheists arrogant. You call people who are agnostic temperament arrogant. Well, you're claiming that you have an understanding of what God wants better than all the other religions, all the other theologians, all the other religious leaders combined. You got the right answer. I mean, talk about arrogance. That is arrogance to me. Like the people that claim their idea of what the Bible says is the only correct idea of what the Bible says, discounting everybody else. So in other words, everybody else is wrong, you're right, but atheists are arrogant, right? Wonderful, solid reasoning you got here. Some others will think of this list as defects of character. Still others will call it an index of maladjustments. Well, what do you mean by a maladjustment? A maladjustment could be a situation where a child is raised in an abusive home, goes to an inner city school where he's the subject of maybe toxic gangs and things like that attack and bully him, and then he's thrown out into the world unsuspected and trying to deal with it, but it's not his fault. It's a maladjustment based on environmental circumstances. So what do you mean by maladjustments? You got to define maladjustments. Some will become quite annoyed if there's talk about immorality, let alone sin. Yeah, because we don't like religious institutions preaching to us any more than we want to hear it from you, Bill W. But all who are in the least reasonable will agree upon one point. There's plenty wrong with us alcoholics, about which plenty will have to be done if we are to expect sobriety, progress, and any real ability to cope with life. This right here, all who are in the least reasonable. In other words, if you don't agree with my religious dogmatic teachings, you're unreasonable. If you have any kind of reason whatsoever about you, you're just going to fall in line and understand that I'm right about everything, and all you alcoholics are wrong about everything. But I'm a humble person by telling you this. In other words, if I got you on a street corner and I said to you, you got to believe the way I do religiously, or even if you're halfway reasonable, you're going to agree with everything I say religiously. And then I tell you I'm a humble person, and I tell you people who don't believe like I do are arrogant and think that their will is the end all and the be all, like these stupid atheists, rather arrogant of them, but if you don't accept everything I say at face value, then you're not at all reasonable. You're not even the least bit reasonable, But if you were, you would agree with me 100%. That's what he's fucking saying here. And then saying there's no real hope for you unless you agree with me 100%, or at least you're a little bit reasonable. What an arrogant fucking statement to make, To avoid falling into confusion, Bill writes, over the names these defects should be called, let's take a universally recognized list of major human failings. A universally recognized list throughout the entire world. Right? The 7 deadly sins of pride, greed, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, sloth. Oh, that's universal. Taking pride in things is universally despised. Having lust towards another human being is universally despised. Is it? Or is it just despised by weirdo religious nutcases like yourself that think it's bad to feel any kind of sexual desire? Unless, of course, you're preying on newcomer women like Bill W. was known to do. Then it's okay. It's okay when he's doing it. It's just not okay universally for people like us stupid drunks to do it, right? It's not by accident that pride heads the procession. Well, of course, there again, you're claiming that. You're claiming that pride is the worst of all the sins. You're not telling me why. You're not telling me what universal principle says. You're, without a doubt, the world over, everywhere, in the far corners of the earth, in the furthest out reaches of civilization, everybody all agrees that pride, or having pride in yourself, is the worst thing ever. I mean, this is utter bullshit. Coming from a man who's telling you he knows what God wants above everybody else, and is telling you that pride is the bad guy. The very guy that's telling you you're not reasonable if you don't fall in line and agree with every one of his phony fucking teachings is telling you that pride is universally recognized as the worst thing ever. For pride leading to self-justification and always spurred by conscious or unconscious fears is the basic breeder of most human difficulties. Right, if I do a good day's work and I take pride in it, that's all based on fear, right, Bill? If somebody learns a new skill or acquires a new trade or accomplishes a task that they never thought they were going to be able to. Like if you're a person with, say a physical condition that oftentimes constrains you in everyday ordinary life, and you manage to go out and run a marathon race and manage to complete the entire race, even though the idea of doing physical activity is limiting on someone with a physical condition such as yourself, and you say, wow, I did it. I proved to myself I could do it. In spite of the fact the medical community says I shouldn't be able to do that. That's just evil. It's all based in fear. It's all based in everything else. This is blabber, okay? Pride lures us into making demands upon ourselves or upon others which cannot be met without perverting or misusing our God-given instinct. What? I thought AA said you could believe whatever you wanted to. I thought AA said you could have any higher power you want. Now Bill W. is telling me that any kind of pride anywhere is perverting God and his given instincts. In other words, God wants me to be a subservient asshole who sits in meetings at the mercy of old-timers, being told what another piece of shit I am for the rest of my life. And if I have a problem with that, I'm perverting what God wants, my God-given instincts, my God-given instinct to eat when I'm hungry, my God-given instinct to sleep when I'm tired, my God-given instinct to do these things, which, by the way, Bill W. can't prove comes from God. Bill W. can't prove that it's not an emergent property of biological evolution. He just makes a blanket assertion that if you like to lay around on the couch on your day off and maybe watch some Netflix shows, you're perverting God and his instincts that he gave you. This is bullshit, When the satisfaction of our instincts for sex, security, and society become the sole object of our lives, then pride steps in to justify our excesses. You work and pay bills so you can have a nicer home. You work and pay bills so you can maybe get out of debt. As far as wanting sex from a consenting partner, this is some kind of bizarre soul sickness society. So wait a minute. If you go to the polls and vote for someone that you believe may or may not be representing your best interest, picking lesser of two evils, or you're kind of up to date on the latest news and information going on around the world, and you say to yourself, I would like to see a safer society, or I would like to see a society that's a little bit not as oppressive as societies of the past, in terms of dictatorships and authoritarianism or certain countries who have lost their basic human rights. If I want to see a better society, it's because I'm just filled with pride. Give me society to do what I want. Give me all the sex. Give me power, money. This is stupid. I don't know what I think he must have been drunk writing this shit. I mean, I think he must have been totally drunk to be writing this total bullshit. Let's see. All these failings generate fear or soul sickness in his own right. No, fear is not a soul sickness. Fear is not a God-given right. Fear is an emergent property of biological evolution that began when the first caveman crawled out of his cave and he saw another violent caveman coming at him with a rock, trying to bash his brains in with it. And he said, unless I can kill this fucking guy, I better get out of the goddamn way and hide somewhere. Okay, when a saber-toothed tiger was coming after you because it hadn't ate in a couple of days and you ran from it, that was not a soul sickness. That was self-preservation, which is bred into every human being for centuries now. So Bill doesn't understand that either. And he's calling this a soul sickness. It's a soul sickness to be afraid. It's a soul sickness if you hear about a mass shooter on the news and you think, holy fuck, what if a mass shooter did something like that in a crowd where I'm standing right now? Or if you hear about a horrible car crash caused by a bunch of negligent assholes that were out drag racing on the interstate, and you think to yourself, well, what if I'm driving down the interstate and a bunch of morons decide to drag race on the interstate and I get fucking injured, paralyzed, or killed? That's a soul sickness. Then fear in turn generates more character defects, he writes. Fear generates more character defects. So if I'm concerned for my safety, if I put a lock on my door because somebody in the neighborhood is breaking into homes, or if I put a lock on my wheel on my car because there's car thieves stealing cars all over the neighborhood, that's going to cause more character defects. Unreasonable fear that our instincts will not be satisfied drives us to covet the possessions of others. Who? What? During all my time drinking, I never coveted the possessions of others because I was afraid. When I was a drinking man, there was only one thing I wanted to do: drink. I wanted to get off work and I wanted to drink. I wanted to say to myself, I hope when I pay off all my bills this month and when rent's due, I'll have plenty left over so I can booze it up. I never said to myself, oh, I'm afraid I won't get enough sex and enough power and enough prestige, so therefore I hate everybody else and I want everything they got. I mean, this is a straw man. It's a bad straw man. He's painting something that nobody actually feels like. And he's saying, this is how you feel. We eat, drink, and grab more of everything that we need. You mean like him smoking one cigarette after the other even though he was on oxygen? Fearing we shall never have enough. No. You know, you're saying that if somebody indulges in a little too much food and they step on the scale one morning and they say, you know, I'm eating a little too much here, I need to cut the calories out. First of all, I got to get rid of that junk food. I got to get rid of this stuff. My blood sugar's a little high, so I got to get rid of, you know, as much as I love those fucking Kit Kat candy bars, I got to toss them. And I got to get more exercise. That is not based on a fear that I won't get it what I want. If you like to eat too much candy, it's not based on, I'm afraid I'll never have all the candy in the world should belong to me because I'm afraid I'll never have enough. No, I believe it's called something that tastes really fucking good, and you think to yourself, I'm just going to eat one of these. You end up eating 5 or 6 of them, and you say, you know what? Every time I start eating this candy, I just eat too damn much of it because it's just so fucking good, and I'm just going to have to stop buying the candy. That's what reasonable, rational people do. It's not, they don't say, oh, I'm afraid that all the candy in the world will not be available to me. So I demand everybody in the neighborhood, oh, give me their fucking candy now. I covet them. And with genuine alarm at the prospect of work, we stay lazy. Speak for yourself, Bill W. I never stayed lazy. I always had a job throughout even my worst drunken periods. Even if I was working shit jobs and daily construction jobs to get a little take-home pay where I could, daily cash-out pay where I could go get drunk that evening, I always worked. Whereas you, Bill W., never seems to have done anything but fuck up your investments in the stock market, rely on your wife, write this shitty program, and live off the royalties. So don't tell me that I'm alarmed at the prospect of work. And don't tell every fucking body out here with a drinking problem that they're too afraid to go to work. You don't even know the first fucking thing about work. We loaf and procrastinate, or at least work grudgingly and under half steam. No. I always did a good day's work, and so do many, many millions of other people with drinking problems. You don't get to characterize everybody based on your own fucking laziness, Bill. These fears are termites that ceaselessly devour the foundations of whatever sort of life we try to build. You know, this is garbage, but Orange Papers adds on to it. Have you ever seen, he responds to it, such a twisted and warped view of human life? Talk about wallowing in self-hatred, and this is just a tiny part of that horrible book. That's just the first piece of junk that I picked out of that book. The whole rest of the book is like this, too. It's obvious that Bill is teaching self-contempt and working hard to induce a lot of guilt and self-doubt in every reader. And he shoves it all at us under this guise of us alcoholics, we're like this. Plenty wrong with us. And he shoves it all into our faces and then says, to those who have religious training, such a list would set forth serious violation of moral principles. But those of us who have heard God we'd better start feeling guilty right now. We're talking about some serious violations. Religious people wouldn't like us, so we need to wallow in guilt. Bow, lick Bill W.'s boots, and kiss the book every morning on our knees because religious people have a problem with people like us. I have to say it, Orange Paper's right. Speak for yourself, Bill, and I'm not like that. I may not be perfect, but I'm sure nothing like that. And then for all of us stupid people without religious training, Bill said he was going to give us a list of index of maladjustments, lists of defects of character. Then he launches attack on people who might disagree with him. I already actually covered this. If you don't agree with Bill, Orange Papers writes, then you're unreasonable. And I bet you're probably one of those people of agnostic temperament, and you're really evil too. And that's why you object to any talk about immorality and sin. It just seems to be part of Bill W.'s paranoia that he always has to get a dig in there, attacking anybody who disagrees with him before they do it. You know, I'm going to say something really crazy here. I'm going to say something really off the wall. I'm going to say something really fucked up. And before I say it, I'm going to tell you right now, if you disagree with me, you're all fucked up in the brain. It's not my fault that you're going to disagree with me. You're a twisted individual. You're sick. In other words, he's setting himself up in a way where if you counter anything he says, if you say, oh, what you just said sounds really fucking unreasonable, he's going to say, well, not my fault. You're an unreasonable person. People with religious training wouldn't even like you. Then Bill launches into all this heavy self-contempt. There's plenty wrong with us. Let's not be unreasonable here, Orange writes, and I'm going to agree with him. There may indeed be some things wrong with people who are having severe problems with alcohol abuse. There may be all kinds of things. But watch something real carefully here. Bill W. doesn't offer a fix. There's no fix offered. Not really. There's a chance to feel guilt and self-contempt, Orange Papers writes. Just a chance to feel so horrible about yourself, so terrible about yourself, to hate yourself so much that you'll surrender to the AA cult in despair and become converted to his crazy cult religion. He doesn't tell you, for example, now I'm going off script here and I'm going to say something on my behalf. He doesn't say, maybe you need to learn a new coping mechanism because you're in a situation that's so intolerable that you need to drink and drink and drink to escape it. Maybe you need to take a look at your situation and how you can change the situation for the better, how you can change yourself in order to improve the situation. He doesn't say any of that. He tells you you're a horrible human being who's the worst of the worst. He doesn't tell you what to do about it. He doesn't give you any fucking logical approaches. He doesn't say maybe you're living in an intolerable situation and maybe you need to consider doing this or this or this or this. No, he just tells you you're just the most horrible human being to have ever walked the face of the earth, and there's plenty wrong with you, and if you disagree with him, well, that's your problem because you're just not reasonable, but he doesn't tell you what to do about it. Bill will go on and on, Orange Papers writes, for a whole book and tell you have to do the 12 steps because we're all just so terrible. But he actually has no real fix to offer you, no useful solutions. Claiming that the 12 steps will magically fix you, that's not a fix. Claiming that God's just going to zap you in step 7 and take away all your defects of character and moral shortcomings, guess what? That's not a fix. Claiming that you must surrender your will and your life to God, AA, and your sponsor because you're so rotten, that's not a fix. Bill just does all this wallowing in self-contempt, shame, guilt, and wants you to make lists of all these faults and maladjustments without having any real healing or therapy to offer you in return. You notice you write down all that shit on your 4th step, and what do they offer you in return? You're afraid. You're prideful. You're full of fear. You're selfish. But they don't tell you what to do about it. The only thing they tell you to do is pray and ask God to take it away from you. Again, can I pray to become left-handed? And will I become left-handed? Can I pray to look like Brad Pitt? Will I look like Brad Pitt? Can I pray for blue eyes? You can't pray for human nature to go away. I mean, and he's exaggerating human nature anyway. Sure, I mean, you're looking at human nature through a religious lens. You're saying everything in human nature is sinful and disgusting, and religious people would have a major problem with it. And then you're saying that, you're just fucked without surrendering to a higher power to take it all away from you. Well, if you took away all the human nature, you would be nothing. But of course that's what Bill W. wants you to do. He wants you to sit in the fucking cult rooms for the rest of your life talking about how horrible you are. Bill claims God will smile on us if you do this and you'll attain some kind of bliss, gratitude, serenity, and arrive in some kind of heaven on earth. Bill wrote, follow the dictates of a higher power and you will presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstances are. Right. So if you're living in a part of the world that's under, say, a war right now, or if you're living in a part of the world that's just had a brutal earthquake and most of your city lays in ruins, all you got to do is follow a dictate of a higher power. You won't even give a shit, right? That's Bill's plans for you. Obviously, you're going to have a big problem with recovery if God isn't this dictator, which, by the way, I do find it funny that Bill makes all these assertions, but then they'll tell you, but in AA, you can believe in any God you want to. So if I believe in a God that doesn't believe in that human nature is bad, if I believe in something like Spinoza's God, I think therefore I am, or whatever, or even the will, the triumph over, what's the word I'm trying to use? It's not from Nietzsche, it's in maybe Schopenhauer, I think. But anyway, if I believe that there's this inner part of me that can triumph over over difficulty, whatever, through willpower alone. If that's my understanding of God, Bill W. is telling me, no, can't use that. You got to understand mine. Otherwise, you're just not reasonable. AA does not believe you can believe whatever the fuck you want to. They don't. But let's just say, Orange Papers writes, God is really a fascist dictator and we got to follow his orders. How do you get those orders? Oh, through the program. The program that tells you can believe whatever you want. That means that we sit quietly and hallucinate that God is talking to us and giving us orders. In AA, this is known as Step 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So what happens if we mistake our own random thoughts and the jabbering of our subconscious minds for the voice of God? There was an article I read in NPR not too long ago where they were talking about intrusive thoughts, things that people have crop up in their heads and they have no rational reason for it. Like if you're walking across a bridge and you think, what would happen if I just jumped off that bridge? You're not going to do it, but it's just a thought that pops into your head. Scientific communities don't even understand all the processes of the neurons in the brains. We have like 86 billion of them, believe it or not, in our own brains. They don't even understand all of them yet. But Bill W. is telling you, no, don't worry about any of that shit. That's science. That's mankind. You got to bow to God. That's what you got to do, you fucking sinner. Then we had this, after we double check orders with our sponsor or group elders to make sure they're good orders, we follow the orders. In other words, I'm having some thoughts in my head. I think it's God talking to me. How do I know it's God talking to me? Well, I'm going to go to my sponsor, and my sponsor is going to read the big book, and he's going to tell me I'm in self-will. Then he's going to tell me what God really wants to say to me. And, I'm just going to keep doing this and recruiting more members. But do you know something else Orange Papers writes is missing here in all of this stuff? Humor. There's no lightness or humor in any of that. It's all darkness. Just Deacon Death droning on and on about how immoral you are, sin, defects of character, and soul sickness. But Bill launches into his attack on human characters. He said it's universally recognized list of major human failings. Actually, that's not universally recognized. This list is specific to the medieval Roman Catholic Church. And the list of sins is pretty weird. Note that cruelty is not listed on Bill W.'s sins. Note that murder is not listed on Bill W.'s sins. Note that doing things like torture or something like that to an innocent person, that's not on Bill W.'s list of sins. No, sex is. Sex is bad, But, technically speaking, Orange Papers writes, a Nazi soldier following orders could torture and murder thousands upon thousands of people, and he's not really committing any one of the seven deadly sins. So long as he's, not angry, so long as he's not prideful about the whole thing, so long as he's just doing what the higher power told him to do, right? Adolf Hitler did say it was God's work he was doing in one of his speeches, after all. So, you haven't really been lazy, you haven't been slothful, you haven't even really been prideful. You're just carrying out your sick fucking orders, killing people, but that's not, according to Bill W., that bad of a problem. And he goes on to list a few other examples historically. Then he says, personally, I would prefer that if there's this deity I'm supposed to follow and it has a list of deadly sins, maybe it would consider things like cruelty, like murder, like torture, like violation of basic human rights. Far, far, far more worse than, feeling like you want to have sex. Just me. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. But Bill says pride is the first sin. Pride leading to self-justification, leading to perverting God-given instincts, which in turn leads to all this other stuff. Why, it's a regular old domino theory, isn't it? The ankle's bone's connected to the leg bone to the knee bone, right? All of which is completely untrue, period. This garbage is not true on any level, Orange writes. Not morally, not religiously, not psychologically, not medically, not biologically. It's meaningless gibberish, just the deluded ranting and raving of a mentally ill nutcase. Pride doesn't lead to any of what Bill says. Pride does not lead to self-justification. Doing something wrong and trying to rationalize it is what leads to self-justification. Pride doesn't lead to all these other so-called made-up sins. This is insane, meaningless nonsense, just a bunch of words strung together without any real logic or rational meaning. It sounds like it means something, but if you look closely at it, you find that it's nothing but nonsense. Note that Bill Wilson did not denounce excessive pride, false pride, arrogant pride, boastfulness. He just said pride. In fact, there's nothing wrong with having pride in yourself. It's not a sin to pick your face up out of the mud and say, you know what, I'm good at what I do. I don't have to be a doormat and feel guilty about everything. There's nothing wrong. I'm going to add a caveat on that one. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I used to be a terrible drunk that was at the very bottom in my life. My health was failing. My life was falling apart, and I'm not like that anymore. I accomplished that. I quit being like that, and I rose above it. You know, and I'm proud of myself for doing that. Nothing wrong with that. According to Bill, it is. According to Bill, that's a terrible sin that'll lead to self-justification. You know. So Bill wants you to crush your pride, wants you to have no self-respect, doesn't want you to have a modicum of belief in good qualities that you may have as a human being. And he just wants you to, and he wants to crush self-reliance and make you dependent upon Alcoholics Anonymous. This is just Bill's contempt for people with drinking problems, a product of his warped and delusional mind. Period. If you believe Bill's garbage, you're going to get sick. He'll poison your mind with his pure hatred of everybody who has a drinking problem. Bill Wilson even used the term warped to describe people with drinking problems. We want to find out exactly how, when, and where our natural desires have warped us, he writes in the 12 Traditions. Bill thought natural desires were warping people and thought that natural desires and instincts are evil things. I'm telling you, this poor guy, Orange Papers writes, is quite insane. And you can't take any of this shit seriously. And then I'm going to conclude it with, Bill also said alcoholics, especially, should be able to see that instinct run wild in themselves is the underlying cause of their destructive drinking. I like Orange's reply, so I'm going to read it. No, I don't see that at all. Bill is trying to induce contempt for human life by talking about instincts running wild and natural desires being bad. He's trying to bring up images of some vicious, savage, wild animal, out of control, snarling, gnashing teeth, slobber all over the place, totally untrue. And he's also hinting, he writes, that would be another paragraph. I think that's a good way to end this one. It's 37 minutes I've talked here. And I said I didn't really know if I had a topic for this week. But anyway, I'm going to read a subscriber comment before I go. When I told my sponsor, damn, I hate that word, somebody commented on my video, not even in the big book, by the way, that I was going to distance myself from AA due to promotion at work and not having a car and trouble even getting to the damn meetings. Of course, he went straight to the big book and cautioned me about working and jobs and putting them before AA. I think it was the awful chapter in Family Afterward. He didn't congratulate me on my job promotion. He didn't congratulate me on my desire to not want to drink and move on with my life. He just tried to scare me with big book crap. I made amends to this same guy for disappearing years ago, and he tried to use my amends against me like some sort of emotional blackmail. He tried to make me feel like we were super close friends when we are not at all. I'm much happier not being a cult member and glad I revoked my membership. And I guess I will see you guys next week, hopefully.